Welcome to Just Curious. Today I'm joined by Mark Riley, founder and CEO of Mathison AI, a consultancy and AI R&D firm specializing in AI-powered solutions for media and publishing. Mark has an extensive background in innovation, having previously served as SVP of Innovation and Corporate Ventures at Dow Jones, the parent company of the Wall Street Journal, where he led AI-driven initiatives in news and information discovery. Now at Mathison, he's focused on solving media and publishing challenges with AI, particularly in areas like information overload, search, and content relevance. Today we'll be discussing how AI is transforming news and content discovery, helping journalists and businesses cut through the noise, and the future of deep research AI, where AI goes beyond simple retrieval to assist in complex investigations and knowledge synthesis. Mark, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Stu. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Mark, you have a storied career in media and innovation. Tell us a little bit more about you and your work at Mathison and how you're helping media and publishing and content businesses navigate this changing environment.
Sure. Well, I'll give you the quick backstory, but my first exposure to AI is probably back in 2016 when I was leading the innovation team for Dow Jones in New York. And my boss at the time, Will Lewis, asked me to do an AI audit across Dow Jones. So it was kind of a question of finding pockets of AI. And then in the course of the next 2 or 3 years, I probably met over 110 AI vendors, mostly in the Valley. And I was kind of figuring out on behalf of News Corp what was going to be the future of this thing. So came back to the UK in COVID in 2021 and went back to school. Went back to Oxford University and studied the business of AI. And then I did another course at London Business School to study the business application of AI, and happily set up my own boutique consultancy, which is dedicated to advising media, primarily media and publishing companies on the safe and ethical adoption of AI. And it's been a great journey. It's been fascinating to see clients on different levels of maturity. So we kind of bring a three-pronged approach to the problem. So we start off with educate. And I think 2023 was the era of educate for most people. And we'd offer up tutorials and webinars and how-tos. And then after that is ideate. And 2023-4 was kind of the period of ideate, and that mostly involves workshopping, looking for applications. And where we are now, which is where we really want to be as a consultancy, is actually prototyping. So we like to build prototypes, test them out in safe environments, and then if they work, we'll escalate them across the enterprise. That's where we are now, but we've obviously learned a lot along the way, and we've built a couple of our own spin-offs as well, which would be good to talk about.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to exploring some of those. You mentioned that you've been in and around AI since 2016. Over those 8 years, what are the primary changes in terms of relevance to media and also, kind of opportunity / potential for disruption in terms of, the impact on the industry?
So it's very obvious division is to go pre-ChatGPT and post-ChatGPT. So pre-ChatGPT was the period of classical AI, which was mostly around reinforcement learning, classification, and supervised learning. So that was using AI, typically manipulating data to improve business performance. And the best example I can think of in the media world would have been intelligent paywalls that we introduced at the Wall Street Journal. We were one of the very first people to do that. And then you can analyze your subscribers to see which ones are most likely to churn, and you can then present them with interesting messaging to try and retain them. So that was classical AI. Now, in the event of generative AI, in my mind, the definition of generative AI was the moment that humans could interact with AI computers without the need for coding, so we could interact with them in a verbal way. That was existential for media in the sense that it not only depended on their content, but it was massively on their turf. And it's kind of, we can discuss this, but it's good news, bad news for media companies, because the tools that have come out of generative AI are hugely powerful for a newsroom or anyone in the content business creating content. But at the same time, the data and the content that these models have been trained on, and this is a fascinating debate, is very much the content that's been produced by these media companies. So they're in this kind of happy, sad place right now.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Bad news wise, let's start with the bad news because it's better to end with good news. The models have been trained on the content, common crawl, but also media formats of all types. Tell us about like why that's bad news.
Well, it's going through the courts at the moment. So it all comes down to your definition of copyright. And the law would suggest, at least in the UK, it's not fair use policy for large language models to be trained on data or content, especially if it's paywall data or content, if it's behind a paywall, or if it's in an archive that's inaccessible. But the truth is, using the fair use doctrine, these large language models have been hoovering up every piece of human written word they could find. And there are theories that they've pretty much hoovered up everything anyway. And that people can mimic that content or surface that content in search results. That is a problem for the media companies if they're not being remunerated or rewarded for the use of that content. Now, if you compare it to the value exchange of the search engine era, there was a deal done, even if it was done implicitly, that I would let you use some of my data from today's headlines in order to send me some traffic.
Yeah.
And that traffic might generate some advertising or hopefully even some subscribers. And that was a fair value exchange. But the problem we've got now is that let's say you hoovered up the entire archive of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or whoever. What values am I getting back as a content creator for your use of my data? And that hasn't been figured out yet.
Yeah. I guess there's some attempts through like references and Perplexity and some of the other models. But I guess to your point, you didn't get compensated for this content, nor did you allow people to use it. And then secondly, you're not getting the benefits for the most part of using it in the same way you did the search, where you got that content was used to drive traffic to your site, which allowed you to monetize through attention or potentially conversion into subscription. So you're kind of losing on both cases. And then the good news. Let's talk about the good news. What is so interesting and potentially valuable about generative AI for media companies?
So if you think about the journey of a story, let's say a story that's going to be published tomorrow as a headline. If you think about the journey of that story, right the way from when a journalist first started researching it, started digging out the necessary information, finding other sources, piling that story, collaborating with colleagues, fact-checking it, getting it into some sort of content management system, then publishing it, and then putting it out into the world where they're going to track it with analytics. So if you look at the journey of that piece of information, AI is a bit like electricity. It's going to touch every single part of that journey. And what we're seeing now is a bunch of tools that are bubbling up that journalists are using, some willingly and enthusiastically, and others slightly with more reticence. But you can see that journey becoming extraordinarily more efficient. And I think in a media environment where the business models are fragile, to say the least, any kind of efficiency you can find is good news. So I think you're going to see what we are seeing is newsrooms globally or any content producers globally are really starting to embrace these tools. And that's my job as a consultant, is to try and introduce the tools either through bottom up, through adoption and osmosis, say like for that particular part of the process, you can use this, or what we would call top-down innovation, which is the corporate taking a strategic bet on a particular application and saying, well, let's plug that in across the enterprise. So we're advising clients on how to adopt AI to find those efficiencies. But before I finish, the more interesting thing for me is not so much the efficiency gains, which is where we are now, but it's kind of what's the new products that companies and clients can build off the back of AI. So you're building genuinely new revenue streams, which may or may not be in adjacent markets. So that for me, I'm steering my clients away from just purely thinking with the CFO hat on and where are the savings to where can we bring in new revenue off the back of this technology.
Yeah. And I'd love to explore some of those ideas and use cases, but maybe we could start at the beginning with how you work with these media clients. What do they typically come to you with? Are they coming with a problem? Are they coming with an interest in exploring AI? Where do things tend to start?
So inevitably, there's a fascination with AI, and it's a danger to say, I've seen this new technology, I've heard about it, how do I adopt it? I would then push back and using this kind of design school methodology is like, let's look at your business strategy, your objectives, your customer pain points, and let's see if we can solve a problem. And it may be that AI is the solution to that problem, it may not. But by looking at workflows, if you have a very forensic look at an individual or team's workflows, you can start to identify very quickly where the most relevant applications are. Otherwise, you've got the hammer looking for a nail problem. People do a bit of window dressing because they want to put it on their quarterly results that they're embracing AI, which is fine, but you want something meaningful that's going to drive real impact.
And who typically is coming to you? Is it someone from the C-suite? Is it someone focused on innovation? Is it someone focused on revenue generation? Who tends to come to you wanting to explore AI?
Typically, it's a good question because typically, if you look at the data right now, a lot of the AI R&D is still being funded by innovation departments for the larger part, for the bigger companies. And if there's an innovation department that's tasked with looking at use cases, that's great. And it tends to be that they're still in the trial phase, the R&D phase, where what you see when a product leaps out of the R&D bucket into the enterprise bucket, that's when the tech team or the CTO's team will look to embrace it. And then you've got the product people not far behind. And then what often happens is it's either pressure from the shop floor in terms of the journalists, or it's pressure from the customer saying, can we use AI to make this process better? So it's now pretty much everyone. But I think that was the natural flow. It went from innovation to CTO to product to now pretty much everyone.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned people come to you sometimes with a problem, and sometimes they come with an interest in exploring AI. And if they come with an interest in exploring AI, you really want them to go and find a problem, and you and them can determine whether that is a problem that can be solved with AI or not. Tell me a little bit about that process. So someone's come to you, they said, hey, I'm really interested in exploring how I can be an AI native media company. And your response is like, great, let's start with finding some problems. What do you then do?
So it's, this as well as I do, it's such a fast moving field that I think part of my role is to keep people up to date. And I think that comes back to education. So we level set to start with and say, look, let's make sure everyone's on a reasonably level playing field in terms of knowledge, and that knowledge will then build confidence. And once they've got those tools, they can start to make decisions on the best use cases are. But we also, if you've been in this field long enough, you know that there's, have you heard of a website called There's an AI for that?
Yeah.
Lists over 20,000 AI tools now, if you go there today. And I think most problems we identify have already got an off-the-shelf solution. So part of my task is to guide people to the best solutions that I've seen at the best price point, the best reliability and the best confidence and the best security for their problem. But if they have a bigger problem, such as their search function doesn't work well, is there an AI that can do better than their existing search, then we'll then dig into building a prototype for them that does it much better.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you decide whether you've got a small problem that can be solved by one of these tens of thousands of tools, or you've got a big problem, an important problem that requires some sort of custom development, whether that's, a lightweight GPT or an actual, kind of full stack product? How do you decide whether you've got a small problem or a big problem?
So I bet you, if it's a small problem, I bet you that someone in the building's already found a solution to it. They just haven't told anyone. In other words, they've downloaded a tool, or they're using a piece of technology, or they built their own. Perhaps a lot of the my role again is to get people to share, so they can share what successes they're having in the space. The bigger problems are ones that need a kind of VC mindset, or a PE mindset. So it needs the corporation to take a strategic bet in a kind of skunkworks environment. So again, it would be, right, we know that this competitor of ours is coming up the track and they built this solution that would completely wipe out 50% of our business if we don't look at it. That's got to be a enterprise-wide strategic bet that they need to invest to say, let's build our own version of that and let's plug it in and let's see if we can get it to work. So it would never work in a kind of differentiated, everyone try it out solution. It's got to be a kind of hub and spoke solution where the hub will say, right, we're going to give everyone the power to use this. And an LLM is a good example, right? If a business wants to build its own version of a language model that's trained on its data, then that has to be a centralized strategic bet.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier your focus on building product for your clients and prototyping. Tell me a little bit more about that process. So let's say we've decided we have a big problem. or an important problem. We have some hypotheses that we need to validate. We need to run a process to turn a problem into a solution. What does that tend to look like for you and your clients?
So we have a mantra of de-risking and testing, and it comes back to the good old agile development process. So, and the other thing you need to know about AI that a lot of people don't realize is it's not software. You can't just plug it in and turn it on and it works first time. It could be a 3 to 6 month training period. And that is kind of bringing customers, clients' expectations down to that kind of realization that it's going to be an iterative process. So to de-risk, you've got to build a very kind of limited proof of concept. So they've come to me with a hypothesis and we'll look to prove it out or prove it not in a very contained environment. So they're only making a small upfront investment. And then you've got to be very honest. If it's not working, you've got to move on and find a new problem to solve or wait for the technology to catch up. But we've got a good case study that's just gone live. The client actually has human beings listening into the entire EU Parliament and UK Parliament, including all the council meetings and committee meetings. And you know, it's obviously very time-consuming and expensive to have humans listening in and scribing and notating and summarizing, where AI could do that in an instant as long as there's a human in the loop that can fact check it and make sure it's accurate and then pass it back. So we built a solution for them that listens in to audio streams from all these different committee meetings, packages it up into a editing suite where they can check it and then they can press a button and it's downloaded. So their problem to solve was we've got an archaic process of humans being extraordinarily expensive to put in front of these meetings. Why don't we just come up with an AI solution, which we did, which has worked very well. So I think that's a good example.
Yeah, and the return on that is, I guess, less expense for humans or also more accurate kind of transcription and synthesis of what happened. Tell us a little bit about kind of the return.
Well, traditionally, if there's a committee meeting on a Monday, they might get the audio on a Tuesday, they might get to listen to it on a Wednesday, and they might process it on a Thursday. And now you can do that all instantaneously. So you've got a 3-4 day process down to a 30-minute process. So time, accuracy, and costs, clearly, winning on all three fronts.
Yeah. And without like getting into anything sensitive, what sort of tools did you use to build the solution?
So we pulled FFmpeg from AWS, which we plugged into, and we're kind of model agnostic, but I think we're using Claude. We lean towards Claude at the moment, and then we plug it into a UI that's bespoke to the client. So it's a combination of things.
You have another example that we were talking about, which is something you built yourselves at Mathison, which is a company called Hanna News. Tell us a little bit more about Hanna. I guess, again, starting at the problem, what problem are you seeking to solve? And then let's explore what you built.
Yeah, it's a fun one. So the problem is a pretty obvious one, especially I think it's the same in the US as it is in the UK, that the local news or the hyper-local news business model is profoundly broken and it's not being served well. The local governments and councils aren't being held to account and there are news deserts. And the products that do exist are horrendous experiences. They're just saturated with advertising. So me and my colleague, Ed Daniels, gave us the challenge. Really is a fun challenge because I live in a city called Bristol, the west of England. It's about 500,000 people. It's quite a funky, progressive, vibrant city. And we set ourselves a challenge, can we use AI to try and solve this problem? Mostly by producing news that's much more efficient, both in terms of creation and distribution. So we set a team of agents, AI agents, the task of scouring locally for news. And that doesn't just mean going to the local news sites. It could go to public service sites, but also police records, crime, universities, health records, and then pulling back a selection of stories that we could collate in about, it would do the retrieval and the relevancy in about 30 seconds. So you've now got the bare bones of a newsletter that would have taken you half a day at least to find. And then we can edit that, put the human in the loop, and then package it up. So once a week, we distribute a newsletter in Bristol, goes out to about 2,000-3,000 people. And what would have been a day's work, probably got down to about 50 minutes now.
And that you mentioned agents. Tell us a little bit more about, I guess, the tools or the stack that you use there.
So it's similar stack. I think it's, again, it's a combination of Claude and OpenAI ChatGPT. that we're using in the back. We use a mixture of Google SERPs and other news SERPs to go and do the crawl. In the front end, I'll have to check. Again, it's a bespoke front end UI that we've built for the purpose. But what happened after we did Bristol is we suddenly realized that, this is going to work in any city, pretty much any city with a significant news base in the UK or the US. And then it also works on B2B topics. So I put out a newsletter on a Tuesday called Media Morph. And again, I use Hanna as the backbone for that. It'll go off. I just put in the search query AI and journalism, and it goes off and finds me 12 of the best stories globally. I can package that up and get it out the gate in about 50 minutes with a human in the loop and a human editorial is what we insist on. So, it works pretty much in any vertical.
Cool. You related, you were super excited about deep research. Tell me a little bit more about what's exciting you about deep research.
Hannah's got a little brother called George. She's a random working title. And George is a kind of Hanna on steroids in the sense it does build on the agentic AI theory that what we've done is create a team of agents that are now effectively your mini newsroom. So you can give them a task to build a sector analysis report in any sectors. That's when you do electric EVs. And you say, I want a market analysis, I want competitor analysis, I want growth forecasts, and I want some strategy recommendations. So off they go, and they'll talk to you while they're building it, and they'll look at both external sources, and they'll also, with permission, if it's plugged in, they'll look at your internal resources, any kind of documents or pictures or historical papers you've got in your drive. And then they'll come back to you within about half an hour with a finished product that you can then say that's good or that's bad, or go back and fix this or change the formatting. And within a conversation with the agents, you'll end up with a very good bespoke report that's personal to you. No, I'm calling that deep research because everyone's calling it deep research now. I started playing with deep research on ChatGPT, and it is phenomenal. I think the limitations of the ChatGPT deep research are relevant recencies, so it's cut off around February 23.
Yeah.
Also prone to hallucination, also can't talk to your internal docs. So we're very excited about George, that it's now a very powerful tool that we can license to corporates to do the knowledge management in an extraordinarily efficient way using this agentic solution.
Very cool. Going back to the good news for media companies about generative AI, you touched on this earlier on. There are a bunch of use cases that are relevant for media companies. Can you share a little bit more about some use cases that might inspire the audience?
Yeah, I think the number one, this is kind of related to George in a kind of funny way, but the number one, which was almost table stakes now for me, is to build some kind of archive retrieval or some kind of way of search. What's clever about that is it can be a tool that journalists can use to research previous newsworthy articles that have come out on a topic. And then as they're writing their story, they can connect it to previous stories in the database or in the archive. And then that can be put on the website, and that's a much better user experience because it's joining all the dots for a deeper dive on a particular topic. So it's also a fabulous tool for the journalists to use just to be able to start to monetize the archive. Some of the braver companies are putting that tool in front of the end customer, in front of the subscriber, so they can start doing their own deep research once they're in on a topics. If I was reading a story about Latvia today or Lithuania, and I want to know more about them, it'd be given the opportunity to do a deep dive on that topic within the environment that I'm in. So if I'm in LA Times environment or New York Times environment, I wouldn't have to leave that environment rather than coming out, going to Google and doing my research and coming back again. So I think that's a very cool AI use case. But otherwise, it's a lot of applications we're seeing. A lot of them are feel quite menial, repetitive tasks. So it's getting your SEO right, getting your keywords right, getting your social media posts right, all the kind of stuff that journalists hate to do.
Sure.
Because it takes them away from the real reporting and human side of the job.
Awesome. For content and media and publishing companies who are curious about how AI can be a lever for their business, what are one or two recommendations you have for them to get started?
Well, it sounds counterintuitive, but keep it human, right? I mean, this is not in any way meant to take the human away. It's meant to keep the human firmly in the loop. So everything you do should start and finish with the human, whether that's the human journalist or the human subscriber. So you're still building a product to be read by and consumed by humans for now. So I would say whatever you're doing is to either give your colleagues or your customers superpowers and start and end with the human, not trying to plug a technology in, and work back from there. Other than that, I think it's a question of experimentation and just get your feet wet and stay educated and try stuff out. And after that, it's where I get excited is where we have permission to prototype and come to me with a problem, with a challenge, and let's see if we can build a solution.
Yeah. And what's the biggest mistake that people make as they're exploring this technology for the first time, or not the first time, but what's the biggest mistake that you see your clients making?
But it scares me. I think we all make this mistake. People don't realize how fast this stuff's coming down the track. So if you're not already caught up on AI, classical AI or generative AI, you wait for artificial general intelligence or AGI to come down the track. And this is just mind blowing what this stuff's going to do. So the mistake they're making is not staying current. And I think, again, we can help with that. I'm borderline obsessed with this topic, and I spend all day keeping up to date on the latest releases and the advances. So the mistake they're making is thinking they can catch up if they don't act on it now. I think that's a huge, profound mistake. I think they've got to be completely up to speed on it.
Yeah, that's a great provocation. Mark, thank you so much for coming by. Just curious.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Stuart. Thanks a lot.